So I just got word that all of our petitions have been signed, and we have no more copies because we have over 800 signatures just from today. Thank you for showing up, Crosse. This is incredible. I wanted to remind you about the Moms Demand Action Table. You do not have to be a mom to be a part of this group. We call ourselves Mothers and Others, people who care. All right, next. I am so proud to introduce this man. I am a Central High School graduate myself, Mr. John Havlicek. He's a teacher there and the president of the La Crosse Education Association.
Hi. So, first I just want to say how proud I am to see all of the students and the teachers and just our neighbors out here. I know it's a tough day sometimes and it's a long day, but we have to push on. So the first thing I want you to do is look at the people next to you and realize that we're not alone in this. When you get into some meaningless fight on the internet with some ranter or hater, you have to remember that we are not alone in this. We are, in fact, the vast majority. When the politicians try to wait us out on this, we are not alone. We are the majority. So I was talking to the media a few days ago, and they asked me about the different plans that are being pushed around. And like some other speakers have said, teachers don't want guns in schools. The answer to violence in our schools and our communities is never more violence. So I came up with a list of what we do want. Number one, we want our children and our communities to be safe. Number two, we want our schools and our communities to have the resources that we need. Number three, and I'm glad we have some legislators here today, we want our legislators, our governor, and our president to listen to us instead of listening to the corporate lobbyist masters. Number four, we want our government to fulfill its most basic promises, to protect the innocent and the powerless from the powerful and the violent, to create a fair and just society in which all of us can contribute and benefit, not just the powerful elite. We can and we must create a better society. We have started along the journey, and we must continue, and we must refuse to stop until we succeed. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Kate Nelson, who's a mental health professional, who in my opinion will be bringing one of the most important things we hear today, that we need to stop stigmatizing people with mental illnesses as the cause for gun violence in this country.
Thank you, beautiful humans, inspiring. So I struggled to write this speech all week, if I'm being honest. Not only am I a mental health professional, but I'm also the proud daughter of a Vietnam veteran and the doting aunt of 3 beautiful nieces. I decided that rattling off statistics or hateful words towards one party or group isn't going to get us anywhere. As so beautifully stated by Brene Brown, human beings are hard to hate close up. In having a conversation with my dad on this topic, it only brought light to the division in this country. As a therapist, I operate and I intervene in the gray. I ruminated and researched all week about mental health and gun control, and I realized that I am once again navigating the gray. It's not a black and white issue. Mental health is an issue in this country. and so is gun violence. The two can coexist without casting blame solely on one or the other. I think most of us can agree that it's a complicated issue with many layers. I and many other Americans support men like my father who want the right to bear arms. And yet, I don't want my nieces to have to worry about being shot in algebra class. I think it's obvious that this country has a mental health problem. Is there even a debate that someone must be mentally unstable to murder innocent human beings? I believe we all agree that taking someone's life in cold blood is not the act of a mentally healthy person. I don't think you need a mental health professional to tell you that. But I can tell you, mental health does not discriminate. It is not just a problem in the US. It is a worldwide crisis. And yet, the US has the most significant gun violence issue than any country. So this only leads to one conclusion. We have dropped the ball on common sense gun laws in this country. Mental health continues to be used as a scapegoat on this important issue. When we frame the conversation about gun violence in the context of mental illness, we are doing a disservice to the victims, and we are unfairly stigmatizing the millions of Americans who suffer from mental health. 1 in 5 Americans will suffer from some sort of mental illness in a given year. So tell me, why aren't we seeing more mass shootings then? Because this issue goes much deeper than mental health. So no matter how divided we are in this country, can we all agree that we are done with children being hunted in schools? The solution will not come overnight, and it may take time, but we need to come together to fight for the children of our future. Human beings are hard to hate close up. So let's navigate through the gray together to protect our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Next, we have a history professor from Viterbo, Mike Smutska.
Good afternoon. A good history undermines beliefs often held by political partisans, such as the case with the NRA and their propaganda that emphasizes the Second Amendment with absolute individual rights to gun ownership. The founders' emphasis was on militias, not rights. Moreover, it's common sense that gun laws were passed to ensure public safety. They were prevalent in the 13 colonies and in the states when the new nation was formed. So think about how the NRA would respond to these regulations. First, registration of firearms. Except for Pennsylvania, where a lot of Quakers lived, all white males aged 16 to 60 were in militias, and they were required to have guns held privately. And states and colonies and states actually did censuses to see where these guns were. Secondly, you couldn't carry weapons concealed. For public safety, there was no general right of armed travel when the Second Amendment was adopted. And in fact, in 1813, Kentucky and Louisiana became the first states to pass laws banning concealed weapons. Third, stand your ground laws. Under traditional English common law, no one could stand their ground. You had a duty to retreat. Deadly force was justified only if no other alternative was possible. Fourth, safe gun storage laws were in the interest of public safety. Many municipalities prohibited the storage of a loaded firearm in any domestic dwelling to prevent not only the corrosion of the gunpowder back in those days, but also any potential injury from an accidental discharge, particularly if the house caught on fire. Think of that. Fourth, loyalty oaths. The right to bear arms was conditional on swearing a loyalty oath to the government. Individuals who refused to take that oath were disarmed. Just think how the NRA would respond to those regulations today. They would be opposed to all of them.
Yeah.
What about our legends of the myth of the Wild West of the later 1800s with gunfights at high noon, which we've all seen in countless Hollywood films? Well, these western cowtowns were pretty volatile places. There was a lot of wine, whiskey, women, and weapons. And so they passed gun registrations. A Dodge City billboard warned individuals entering town the carrying of firearms is strictly prohibited. You got to check them in. And the legendary gunfight at the OK Corral in Tombstone, Arizona occurred in part because Tombstone had a law compelling individuals to check their guns when they arrived in town. Gun control worked in western towns of the Old West. Arrests for concealed weapons were second to arrest for drunken and disorderly conduct. And the result limited murders in most of these towns to just 1 or 2 per year. What is surprising is that for the NRA's first 100 years from 1871 to the 1970s, the NRA often supported gun control laws as a matter of public safety. Guns were dangerous in untrained hands and even more dangerous in the wrong hands. The NRA backed the National Firearms Act of 1934, and 4 years later, they supported the Federal Firearms Act, plus a host of measures at the state level, such as you had to have a license if you were a gun dealer. They levied heavy taxes on machine guns. They instituted waiting periods for buying handguns, and they mandated permits for concealed weapons. But in the 1970s, the NRA shifted, and they began to argue that the Second Amendment gave individuals an absolute right to gun ownership, one they falsely claimed had been there since the founding of our nation. Thus their opposition to any common sense gun laws. The NRA opposes the 3-point legislative agenda of March for Our Lives, which is petitioning Congress to pass an assault weapons ban, prohibit the sale of high-capacity magazines, and close the loopholes in the universal background check law. The position of absolute constitutional rights provides cover for the NRA's real purpose. They are a shill for gun makers. Whenever the NRA warns gun owners that the Second Amendment is under attack, it stokes fears that increase the sales and profits of their gun manufacturing friends. In return, gun manufacturers generously reward the NRA with vital funds. When politicians argue that the only solution to mass shootings is arming more Americans, they play directly into the hands of the NRA and gun manufacturers. These politicians have deliberately limited discussion about what is politically possible when it comes to gun violence. Common sense gun laws and gun ownership have always existed side by side in our history. And so as to gun violence, we have to echo the students. Enough is enough. Thank you.
Enough is enough! 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 All right, I want everybody to take a second look over at the park. At all those kids playing on those swings and slides. My oldest daughter is one of those kids. Dad, why are we here? Because next year you're going to have to do a live shooting drill as part of kindergarten. I want Scott Walker to go through a live shooting drill. I want Ron Johnson to go through a live shooting drill. If my kid has to curl up in a ball to be a small target, they should know what that feels like. It's pathetic that we have all these beautiful children over here, and we have a whole country's worth of politicians who are unwilling to save their lives because they like NRA money. Yeah, vote them out. And now I am super excited to bring up Chris Clair, who's an attorney, a former criminal law and constitutional law adjunct professor, who's going to talk about the Second Amendment. So get on up here. Let's give a round of applause.
Dang, it's cold. You guys are awesome for staying here. I just want to follow up with what he said. I was meeting with a 7 or 8-year-old little kid the other day as part of my job as guardian ad litem, and I said, "How's school?" And they explained to me what they had to do for shooter drill in detail. It broke my heart to sit there and listen to, that was their description to me of what school was for them. Okay, I was asked to talk about 2 things regarding guns. One was domestic violence and one was Supreme Court ruling on Second Amendment. In regard to domestic violence, somebody else mentioned, that, and it's true, that abused women are 5 times more likely to be killed when their abuser owns a firearm. Domestic assaults involving 5 firearms are 12 times more likely to end in death. And domestic violence incidents where weapons are present increases the risk to our law enforcement officers who respond to these calls. In Wisconsin, between 2001 and 2010, 224 women were murdered in Wisconsin domestic violence incidents. In 2011, half of all women homicide victims were the result of domestic violence. Currently, in Wisconsin, there is no state law that prohibits a convicted misdemeanor domestic abuser from purchasing or possessing a firearm. A woman or a victim would have to go and get a domestic violence restraining order in order to get that. They have to jump through another hoop. Domestic violence victims are more than statistics. We know that. There are mothers, there are sisters, our friends, our families, our brothers, our cousins, our community members. They are children. They are 16-year-old Jaylene Wiley, who was killed by her ex-boyfriend in her Maryland school this week. She is not only a school shooter victim, she's a domestic violence victim. Now I want to talk a little bit about the Supreme Court and the Second Amendment, and I promise I'll make it short. The leading case on this is D.C. versus Heller. It was a 5-4 decision with Justice Scalia writing the decision. The facts were that the District of Columbia had enacted a law prohibiting individuals from owning handguns, and it required that any legally owned handguns be kept unloaded and disassembled. It was the perfect factual case to go to the Supreme Court for gun right activists. Everything was fine. And Heller was a licensed special police officer for the District of Columbia. He appealed, and in a 64-page opinion, the Supreme Court reversed itself and held that the Second Amendment did protect individuals' rights to possess arms and to use arms for self-defense, particularly inside their home. It specified this new individual right to possess arms, and you may not like that, but it is the law of the land. But it wasn't unlimited right to bear arms. And I'm going to quote Justice Scalia. Like most rights, the Second Amendment right is not unlimited. It is not a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever, in any manner whatsoever, or for whatever purpose. He stated, for example, concealed weapon prohibitions have been upheld by the Supreme Court under the Second Amendment. The court's opinion meaning the Supreme Court's opinion in Heller, should not be taken to cast doubt on long-standing historic prohibitions on the possession of firearms by felons, the mentally ill, or laws that forbade the carrying of firearms in sensitive places like schools or government buildings, or laws that impose conditions and qualifications on commercial sale of arms. So, if somebody argues to you, the Supreme Court has said that I have a right to have any gun I want, wrong. As Cheryl Hancock say, call BS. And tell them that Justice Scalia told you that in DC versus Heller. I support the Constitution. I support reasonable regulation of guns. I support a ban on assault weapons. I support agencies and programs that stand up against violence, like the YWCA La Crosse, New Horizons. I support safe schools for students and staffs, and I do not support, unless the teachers tell me they want guns in, I do not support more guns in school. And I support the amazing young people across this country and here today in this park that are redefining for us, our generation, what citizenship is about. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
I want to invite my friend up here. She has a little chant to lead.
Ready?
Not one more! 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 Not one more!
From the mouth of a 4-year-old. Now, we'd like to introduce two MDs from Gundersen and Mayo, Mark Neumann and Bob Freedland.
Well, it's getting a little long and a little bit more cold, but I have two things I want to leave us with. One of them is related to the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the other one is that we can do this. The American Academy of Pediatrics, which I'm a member of for 35 years, has recently announced that it will promote research $500,000 into an understanding of gun violence and gun risk to children. At the same time, the Academy recommends that we ask our federal government to finance 100 times that amount, $50 million, to the CDC to do this research. At the same time, the president of the Academy has recommended to all pediatricians to involve themselves with events like today, for the reason I'm here as well. Secondly, we can do this, and the reason I say that, as a pediatrician, I know that 100 years ago it was not uncommon for families to lose their children before they get to adulthood. It was part of life. Our great-grandparents will remember that as their active memory. And what has happened since 100 years ago to today, when childhood death for a family is rare? What has happened is we have made policy changes, we have made discoveries, we have researched to the point that when we have disease, we study disease and we provide preventive care. When we have risk to children because of intoxication, we separate the risk from the children so that they can grow up safe. When there are dangerous things and risks for accidents in our communities, we separate those risks from children. We make safe roads. We make safe regulations. And today, children can grow up healthily, and the experience of death is rare. This has been done. It has been done by our great-grandparents, our grandparents, and our parents. And if they can do it, we can do it. We can make a future for our children.
Thank you, Mark. First of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Bob Freedland. I've been an ophthalmologist at Mayo Clinic here in La Crosse for 23 years now. But I speak for myself. I don't speak for my institution. Maybe I want to be clear. I had a bunch of cards in my pocket to read, but it's too cold. In fact, it was so cold, I was thinking of leaving before I spoke. So I thank you all for staying. It occurred to me, as I look back at my own life, that some of my early memories are about gun violence. Back in 1963, when I was 9 years old, I stayed late for flag duty, missed the regular bus, had to take an extra bus. I was living in Maryland, and my mother met me at the bus. And she said President Kennedy had been shot. I knew I liked John Kennedy. Even at 9 years old, I was inspired. In 1967, I was in Los Angeles, and I was going door to door, working for Robert Kennedy. And I got home, and that night my mother woke me up, and she said, Robert Kennedy's been shot at the Ambassador Hotel. And I believed in the things he believed in. And then Martin Luther King was shot. Even Ronald Reagan was shot, but somehow the conservatives seemed to live. Just a fact. The thing is about this whole thing about school violence, we have to remember, we can't simplify it and say this is just about schools. Okay? We can't make it easy for politicians who could say we can harden schools, because this is so much greater than schools. It was in a concert venue that the guy shot from the hotel. I don't care how many guns anybody those people would have had. You can't shoot back in a concert venue with somebody shooting from a high building. It was in a nightclub in Orlando. That wasn't a school. It was in a church in Texas. We cannot just harden our schools. When we harden our schools, when we harden our churches, when we harden our concert venues, we can't harden everywhere. Because when we harden those places, you could say we harden our hearts. It's no coincidence that students stood up after women stood up. Me too. After African Americans and people of color stood up, because Black Lives Matter. The entire issue of gun violence is symptomatic. As a doctor, I could say maybe there's a disease infecting our country of hate. Hate. Instead of, we were all interested in, yesterday, the president, to distract from his little sexual, everybody watch 60 Minutes, please. I just want to put in a plug in for 60 Minutes. To distract us, he rolled out an old hate. He said, now we're going to go after transgender in the military. I mean, it's just, it didn't even shock anybody. We've heard that one before. But so when we talk about violence and we talk about our society, we talk about guns, we have to stop thinking about hate. We have to start thinking about love. We have to start thinking about health care. We have to stop testing hungry people for drugs in their systems and give the hungry people some food. So don't let politicians nail you down to just talking. I know it's so important to make our schools safe. I am sick and tired of new towns. I'm sick and tired of Auroras and the Florida shooting. I'm sick and tired of it all, but it's a very big issue. We have to get rid of assault weapons. I was going to say something that assault weapons are very different. That was on my card.
than regular. There's a good article in the Atlantic last month. Dr. Scheer wrote it. Some of you may have seen it or heard about it. And she was shocked by the fact that when the victims came into the hospital, she's a radiologist that worked at a Florida hospital looking at their x-rays. When the victims came into the hospital, the injuries received from the AR-15 were very different than injuries from pistols and other guns. The AR-15, based on the military rifle, shoots at 3 times the speed and 3 times the energy. And so people compare it to a Pepsi can getting shot into your body because it cavitates as it goes in. It creates damage to organs inches away. She said that the exit wounds from a normal bullet are about the size of the bullet. But the exit wounds from an AR-15 can be the size of an orange as it obliterates. So the kids that the first responders caught were dead when the first responders arrived. So don't ever have anybody say just AR-15 it's a cosmetic difference and it's just another gun. If they say, well, what about this rifle too, besides the AR-15? We'll say, well, ban that also. So it's very, very cold, and we got a few more speakers. So I just thank you all very much for giving me the opportunity to share with you some of my thoughts, and be well.
Thank you for sticking with us, La Crosse. I know it's really cold. I don't know if you guys know my other role, but I do run nature school in La Crosse, and we're outside all the time, and when we're cold, we jump up and down, so I want everybody to jump! Thank you, warm it up. We have a few more speakers, including myself, so please stick around. Next, we have a senator. Oh my goodness, Senator Jennifer Shilling from the 32nd District.
Thank you. We are in the sunset of our program today of speakers, but we are in the dawn of day of change. You may feel those winter winds a-blowing, but they are the winds of change. They're coming in every direction, and they're blowing across this country. Good afternoon, friends, neighbors, community leaders, and change makers. I want to say thank you to the students, to the organizers, to my fellow speakers, and to you, the change makers, for being here with us today in our community. We are gathering across this great country of ours in communities big and small, from all walks of life, to support the youth of this country that have lifted up their collective voices in calling for change in gun safety, and to end the epidemic of gun violence in our homes, our schools, our workplaces, and communities. This effort, led by teenagers who identify themselves as the mass shooting generation, has called out lawmakers who have done nothing to curb the violence and enact reasonable reforms in purchasing and owning firearms. This negligence for a generation has got to come to an end. This change is already beginning, though, with some firearm retailers imposing new restrictions. But is it imperative that your lawmakers hear your voice and exercise the same courage, dedication, and persistence that the students of Parkland, Florida, and the students across Wisconsin, the students right here in our community, and the students across our country that have demonstrated over the last several weeks? Please know that I hear your call for reform. My name is Jennifer Shilling, and my sisters and I are survivors of gun violence. When we were 18, 20, and 22, our parents were murdered in our restaurant along with 5 of our employees. I know and share the pain. I hear your call for universal background checks. I hear your call for mandatory waiting periods. I hear your call for raising the age to purchase semi-automatic weapons and firearms to 21. I hear your call for a ban on bump stocks and assault weapons. I hear your call for stronger mental health services for individuals and the funds to pay for it. These are reasonable, common sense measures that the public supports. We must work to make sure our elected officials support these measures too. And if not, they will feel the consequences they will feel the consequences of the electorate at the ballot box. If we can't change their minds, we will change the faces. And the timing couldn't be better with an election in spring, in April, and I voted yesterday, and an election in November. It's the Supreme Court this spring, the governor and attorney general and legislative offices in November. And be known that our attorney general is on record of supporting arming teachers. Just yesterday, Senate Majority Leader Fitzgerald called legislation on background checks dead in the Senate. He is clearly tone deaf on the need to act on this long overdue reform, and I hope Wisconsin calls him. The youth of today have brought us all here to this moment, a moment supported by families, adults, parents, survivors, and victims. The charge is never again, and enough is enough. Just think, only 6 weeks ago, those students of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School were just that, school students, high school students. They were living a pretty typical life, I imagine, when on Valentine's Day their lives changed forever. They buried their classmates and their teachers. They organized. They held a vigil, a town hall meeting. They did marches. They did interviews. They lit up the social media world. They met with lawmakers. They met with federal lawmakers. They organized today's march in Washington, D.C., and sister marches are happening all over America. They have not had time to heal, but they march on. It is how they cope. If they can be that brave, that courageous, that focused, that articulate, that persistent, that move to demand change, then we should expect no less from our lawmakers. Today we march for our lives. Today we march for our loved ones. Today we march for our communities. Today we march for change. Thank you so much for everybody for being in this moment and growing this movement onward, upward, and forward together. Thank you.
All right, we got 2 more speakers. I know it's cold. I know you've been waiting out here all day and listening. But you know what? It's going to take stamina to get what we want done. We can't make any mistakes. The ones who stand against us on this issue are not going to go down without a fight. So thank you for sticking this out in the cold. And now I'm pleased to bring up Bishop J. Lampert of the Episcopal Diocese of Eau Claire, who's come all the way down from Eau Claire because Eau Claire didn't have a rally. So he's come all the way down to be with us today.
My name is Jay Lampert. I'm Bishop of Diocese of Eau Claire. I'm also a retired Navy chaplain. I want you to know that where my favorite place is for a gun is on the deck of a ship. We call them other aspects of, we call them weapons or pieces. But one of the things that I'm also is a bishop of the Episcopal Church, and on the 7th of March, the House of Bishops passed a resolution unanimously. We can hardly ever agree on anything unanimously, but on this we did. And it has to do with gun violence and students. I have a home in Florida. I am a resident of Florida. I spend most of my time in Eau Claire. My wife comes back and forth from our home in Florida. I pray an active kind of prayer. I don't like that phrase, our thoughts and prayers are with you. That is usually a cover-up for doing nothing. Active prayer is this. You have 2 ears and 1 mouth. 2/3 of prayer is listening to God. 1/3 is responding back. It is an active process that isn't just making something up and calling it in the name of God. It is a listening, reflective process. And we know who the senior partner is. Part of this has to do with the students. And I want to speak especially to you. The House of Bishops said, we as bishops are to follow your lead. The reason for that is what we do as adults doesn't work. That is not a joke. This is the truth. In Florida, in Parkland, those students came to Tallahassee, and that legislature and that governor signed, yes, it's not enough, but it was a lot. And it was a beginning. Real change has taken place in that state. And there's a reason for it. When I talk, or other adults talk, the legislatures, the lawmakers are receiving this as cognitive. It is theoretical. When you talk, it's experiential. Those Parkland students had experienced gun violence. And one of the things people are wondering about is what's going to happen after today. I don't believe they listen to the adults, but they will listen to you because you go through active shooter drills constantly. I have 3 children. One is 26. The others are 32 and 30. They have never gone through gun drills like you do. What I would like to see for you to do is to petition lawmakers of both parties, petition the governor of the state of Wisconsin to come and participate with you in active shooter drills, not as an observer, but as a participant. I would like to see them do it at 3 levels: elementary school, middle school, high school. I would like Governor Walker to have to curl up in the turtle position next to a 7-year-old. What will happen is they will experience this as you do. They will see gun violence through your eyes, and it will change their hearts. What the drill represents is a call not to live, but to exist. And God didn't make us to exist. He made us in His likeness and image to live. We were not called to survive, but to thrive. We were called to dream and to have vision and to have hopes for the future. This is a time to make that change. And we adults can't do it. Only you can do it. And so it's my pledge as a bishop to have your back and to follow you and urge you to invite every legislator of the state of Wisconsin to come to your school and go through these drills. Help them to see this through your eyes. Finally, tomorrow for Christians, it's Palm Sunday. It starts Holy Week. The cross is used by the Roman army was similar to what guns have done to us. It was a symbol of coercion, oppression, violence, hatred, mockery. And Jesus chose instead to love and to have life. And so I hope that Christians will reflect on this week and gun violence. The guns don't belong in your school. The shooter drills are a statement of existence when God calls you to live. So, we bishops of the Episcopal Church, my message is supposed to be directly to you. We will follow you. We will accept your guidance. We will walk in love. Thank you for your witness. We expect change.
Our last speaker is an awesome human, somebody I love dearly. When La Crosse didn't have a nature school, she started one. When La Crosse didn't have Mothers Demand Action, she made it happen. So let's listen to Gretchen Paquette.
Thank you, and thank you all for sticking around to hear me. Last month, 17 people were shot and killed, along with more than a dozen who were injured, at a high school in Parkland, Florida. We were all deeply affected by this tragedy. Shortly after this, I saw a commercial that chilled me to the bones. A clip of small children partaking in a lockdown at their school, silently hiding under their desks while their teacher locks the door and keeps her fingers pressed to her lips, reminding them to not make a sound. The children look around fearfully, wondering if it's real or just practice. A minute goes by, and finally over the loudspeaker a voice says, "The lockdown drill is complete." The children quietly take their seats. This is our reality. Our children have to practice hiding from gunmen. Only in America is the phrase "yet another mass shooting" part of our vocabulary. More than 96 Americans are killed and hundreds of others are wounded every single day in our country. Our nation's students and educators should go to school to learn and teach, not to run and hide from gunfire. We do not have to live like this. In the wake of the Parkland tragedy, students took action and announced a march on Washington and encouraged our nation's youth to do the same in their communities. Today, led by our nation's youth, we rally in our communities, both big and small, in all 50 states. As part of the March for Our Lives, we send a message loud and clear. It is long past time our lawmakers make students' lives and safety a priority and pass common sense gun safety legislation. Yeah. We march with members of our community and survivors of every form of gun violence because there is no such thing as too soon to talk about gun violence. There is only too late. Thoughts and prayers alone are not enough. We must demand action to end gun violence. We are honored to be following the lead of our nation's youth. We are marching alongside these incredible students and our entire community in hopes that we can create lasting change so that our families can live without fear of gun violence. We march to send a strong message to our nation's leaders in Washington, in state houses, and in corporate boardrooms across the country, that we will not stand idly by while our safety, the safety of our families, and the safety of our communities is put at risk by a dangerous gun lobby agenda. Ignoring our nation's people isn't working. They're demanding safer gun laws, and we're demanding safer gun laws. And we'll be there every step of the way to send that message. It is a time to march for our lives, not just today, but from here on out. Keep this momentum going. Pressure lawmakers and our nation's leaders to make safer gun laws and support universal background checks. Use your vote as your voice, please. It is time to change our country's conversation about gun violence. Whether you're Republican, Democrat, own guns, don't own guns, pro-Second Amendment, against the Second Amendment, we can all agree that our children should be safer. We will make history, and we will make America safe again. Thank you.